Disney singer. I heard yours was assistant to the worship pastor was your dream job. Assistant to the worship pastor. Was that? No? What'd you, oh, sorry, I couldn't hear that. What'd you say? Somebody else. Professional fisherman and angler. That's good. Guy Fieri? That's great. Anybody else? Dream job. Alabama football coach. Well, they make a lot of money. I don't know how stress-free that job would be. Anybody else? Dream job? Ballerina. Good. Stay-at-home dad. Come on. Well, my name's Thaddeus. Yeah, go one more. I see you. Are you waving or have one? That's a good one. International tour guide. I would love that. My name is Thaddeus. I'm the lead pastor here in 704. We're really thankful that you're here. If it's your first time, if it's your 100th time, we love to be here together and worship. 4 Minutes of Family is our attempt to help you just get to know everybody. That it's hard. Sometimes you show up and maybe you showed up a little bit late and then you got to leave right after, and there's a little bit of time so you can get a little bit of a glimpse into other people's lives. But we are in a series called the Psalms of Ascent, and we're continuing that series, but we're also in a time of the church calendar approaching something called Lent. And if you were raised in a Catholic church, you're probably very familiar with Lent. If you were not raised in a Catholic church, you might think that I'm like preaching a heresy right now, like I used to think. I was raised Presbyterian, and when I first went to college, people were like, hey, we're giving up something for Lent. And I was like, I'm not Catholic, I don't give up things for Lent. And they were like, well, try it. And then one guy in college gave up TV, and then he soon never did that again because March Madness happens during Lent. And we're so superficial. But we as a church over the last few years have observed the very historic and ancient practice of Lent. And you might say, well, what is Lent? Why do we do it? The word Lent, Lenten, just means to lengthen. And if you pay attention outside, for the last month and a half or so, the days are getting longer. And that's where the word comes from. And so what happens is that this Wednesday is Ash Wednesday. If you've been in a Catholic church or if you go around on Wednesday, you'll see people with ash on their forehead from going to Catholic Mass and doing the service. We're not going to do that. But from this point on, from Ash Wednesday until Easter, the Catholic Church and Christians across the world will fast from certain things and observe Lent as we get ready for Easter. And for me, one of the big reasons, if you're wondering, hey, why do you like to do Lent? I'll tell you. One of the things that I've been convicted and made aware of is that I far more am aware of the Western American calendar than I am the church calendar. So when holidays or events like Easter come up, we can be surprised by it. You know what I'm saying? They'll be like, oh, Easter's in 2 weeks? Oh man, what are we going to do? But we are never surprised by Christmas, are we? Like October, you're like, oh, Christmas is coming because they got gingerbread lattes and there's little lights in my neighbor's house, right? We're never really surprised by even like Halloween or maybe 4th of July or spring break or all of these things that are not bad things. But as a Christian, I go, I want to focus on the things that are important in my Christian life far more than I am the world that I live in and the culture that I'm a part of. And I believe about the resurrection of Jesus, that it's the single most important day in human history. We should be anticipating that day more than we do Christmas or any other day of the year. And the interesting thing for me is that there's 6 weeks that we anticipate resurrection. It's a number of disorder and chaos in the Bible. And then the way that the church calendar follows is that after resurrection, on Resurrection Sunday, there's actually 7 weeks of celebrating and picking up. And so if you fast, you then feast. And 7 is the number of wholeness. That there's a day in 6 weeks that we're going to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus the Christ. That if Jesus just went to the grave and went through the cross, it would just be a cross. But because there's a resurrection on the other side, it is new life for everyone who believes. It is the most significant day. So, I've been doing it, and we want to invite you as a church to do it. And there's 3 very simple things that we're going to invite you to do and challenge you to do. And it kind of goes with an acronym of FAST. So the first one is we'd invite you to fast. And as a church, we're going to pick Tuesday. It doesn't start this Tuesday, but the following Tuesday. And whether that's just one meal a day or you would like to do it for a 24-hour period, is to fast together and know as a church we're going to be fasting. There's a lot of us that will be doing it. And also if you're in a small group or you have a good friend or a spouse, to say, hey, what if we fasted? Even just a meal. Maybe you've never fasted and you're like, I couldn't do that. Just one meal. And we're going to be giving you things to pray for specifically for the church, but also invite you as like, what's something that you've been hoping God would do or wanting to know about God? And on this Tuesday, would you take time when you're not eating to pray and pursue that? So that's the first one, fasting on Tuesdays. The second one is an A. We're going to abstain. And so I don't want to say you're going to fast from social media because the definition of the word fast is from food. And so we're going to abstain from something. So pick one thing. Maybe you want to pick like 17 things. I don't know, whatever it is. And pick one thing and say, hey, starting Wednesday, I'm going to abstain until Easter. It doesn't need to be something necessarily that is sinful, though it could be. Maybe you're living in sin and you're like, I need to stop. Maybe it's something that's okay, but you think maybe it's getting in the way of other things. And so it could be something like social media. I mentioned shopping on Amazon Prime, and people are like, no, I can't give that up, right? It could be, I've read, it's even things about like gossiping. I'm going to choose for the next 6 weeks to only speak positively all the time, which would be a really, really hard thing to abstain from for some of us. It could be abstaining from certain vegetables or meats or caffeine or sweets or whatever it might be. So we're going to fast on Tuesdays. We're going to try and abstain from one thing. And then the S in our FAS is that we're going to study. And every Sunday night, starting not this Sunday, but next Sunday, we will be looking at the last week of Jesus' life through the Gospel of Mark, Mark 11 through 15. We're going to have an in-person option and an online option. And so you can basically, over the course of the next 6 weeks, see what Jesus was doing and why he was doing it, and talk about it with other brothers and sisters in Christ as we anticipate and get closer to Resurrection Sunday. So fast, abstain, study. Cool? If you have questions about it, if you're curious about it, feel free to reach out, because I know even as we talked about it with our leadership team, they're like, why are we doing that? What is the deal with Lent? And it's an interesting practice. And so please talk with us, because we're still learning just like the rest of us are. But we are going to continue in our Psalm series. We're in Psalm 128. If you need a Bible, you can raise your hand, and we have a team that'll pass them out. They'll also have the scripture up on the screen. If you're watching online, they actually do a pretty good job of having it being on like the lower thirds as we're teaching through it. But before we do that, we have a bell work. Anybody love bell work when you're in school? Yeah, teachers. Study. F-A-S-T. There's only 3. You guys are mad about the acronym? Maybe you need to abstain from being mad about bad acronyms. I found your abstention for the next 6 weeks. Criticalness of your pastor. It's just F-A-S, but then the study is the fist. It's like capital F-A-S with a lowercase t. All right. You want to come? You go. It's a rough crowd today. I'm good for it. Let's go. We'll see what you think after we talk for a little bit more. The sermon we're going to do, it's going to be fast. Okay. Where are we at? If you're new, I'm sorry. We don't normally have outbursts like this. Sometimes we do. We're in Psalm 128. We're continuing this idea. They're called Psalms of Ascent, literally walking uphill towards Jerusalem to worship. They would go 3 times a year at least. We are saying we are disciples on a pilgrimage following Jesus, and it often, what you know this, feels like an uphill climb. And so all 15 of these Psalms, we started in Psalm 120, we will end in Psalm 134, are parts of our discipleship. If you don't like the word discipleship, say apprentice. And if you don't like being a pilgrim, say you're a sojourner. Whatever words work best for you. Is there's all these different pieces. And last week, Wayne did a great job of saying, hey, work is a part of your pilgrimage. But if the Lord isn't in it, then watch out, you know? And this week, we're going to look at a different one. But what I want to do first is I want to ask you, and I'm going to jot some of these down. Can you throw me a pen from my bag? That's right, I need a pen. I need to ask you, what are some responsibilities or relationships? Oh, you broke my pen. Don't, I got this one. Don't. It's like when one student acts up, the rest of them do, you know? Okay. Okay. I need you to tell me, and if you have a pen, if you take notes or if you have your phone out, I would encourage you to write these down. This is going to be important for us to think about as we go through this morning. What are the relationships or responsibilities that you carry right now? You'd say maybe you have like 10, but what are some of the most important ones that you carry? Parent, sure. What else? Wife, or let's say spouse, is that all right? Teacher? Coach? Employer? Interpreter? Say that again, Kish. Interpreter, advocate. That's good. Anybody else? Other responsibilities or relationships that you have? Financial? Sure. Financial, roommate. Yeah, sibling, brother, sister, right? Anybody else? One or two more? Good. Grandparent? That's good. Friends? Pastor? Intercessor? Somebody said son, so child. That's good, right? We also have younger people here. So we have, instead of teacher, we have student. Instead of coach, we have athlete. Instead of employer, we have employee, right? So now I'm going to ask you this question. Of that list, which of those would you say is paramount? What is the most important? And none of us said God, which is good because that's like the answer. But like, what is the most important responsibility relationship that you have right now? Spouse? What about single people? What's the most important relationship you have? I'm sorry? Being a parent? Sure. If you had to cut one of these responsibilities out, maybe I don't want to hear you say that. What would be the one that you would cut out? Maybe ask it a different way. What is the responsibility or relationship that you spend the most time on? Is that the same as the most important? And then let's say, so you work, right? So you have 40 hours a week. You don't spend more time with your spouse than you do at your work. But then I would say, what do you spend most of your mental energy on? You would say, well, my kids. I don't really spend a lot of mental energy on my parents, but they probably spend it on me. Maybe if you're an employer, you spend it a lot on your employees. But if you're an employee, you don't spend it a lot on your employer. And as we start talking about these, if you've actually done the exercise, I wonder how you feel when you think about all of your responsibilities. Overwhelmed, anxious? Maybe like, I'm going to crush it. Let's seize the day. Let's get to work. Exhausted. The interesting thing about this is that when we think about our responsibilities, we often picture them like balancing different things. So there's a picture, you've seen it probably, of spinning plates. So I can spin one plate on my finger, and then I'm going to get another one over here. And this is my spouse, and this is my kids. And then I've got another one that's, my friendships. And then I've got another one that's me, and I'm balancing that on my nose. And then I've got like my finances out here. And then you say, well, what about like your parents? And I'm like, I don't know where to put them. And so you like put one on your thumb and one on your pinky. And then you're doing all I was actually thinking about balancing plates up here, but I'm terrible at it. So they would all broken. But that's what happens. We think we have to balance all of these things out, and if we can't keep them spinning, they're going to fall and shatter, but we think they're all important, but in different measure. And if that were true of life, it would always be exhausting. But that's not what this psalm points to. This psalm is very aware that you have other responsibilities, things that both take up your mental energy and your actual time, but then it invites you to see them not as compartmentalized, but more with prioritized. Let's look at Psalm 128, verse 1, and you're going to see where the psalmist goes in these 6 verses. He says, verse 1, "Blessed are all who fear the Lord, who walk in obedience to him." That is the main point of the whole day, maybe our whole lives. You're blessed if you fear God and you obey him. But how? What does this have to do with all of my spinning plates and all of my responsibilities? I've even got some, since you've been talking, I thought of them. I didn't realize before that they were a responsibility. Verse 2, "You will eat the fruit of your labor. Blessing and prosperity will be yours." You notice the first thing it says is if you obey, verse 1, and you fear, your labor's going to be fruitful. The psalmist is singing, you're going to have blessing and prosperity as an individual. So don't even look at other relationships first. Look at yourself. If you can fear the Lord, and I don't know exactly how to fear the Lord, but it's probably like that look up sermon. Do we actually see God as high and exalted? That he is our Father and our friend, but he's also God. And maybe you're like, well, it means reverential fear, but sometimes just the fear needs to be in you too. That he's going to come and judge someday. He is awesome in power and in wrath. And maybe it's good for you to be like, I'm terrified of God today because he's awesome. But it's fear and obey. And it says first, you'll eat the fruit of your labor. Whatever your work is, you'll produce fruit. And you know, too, culturally, they're primarily farmers, agrarian people. But then it doesn't just stop with the man. Look at verse 3 and 4. "Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your children will be like olive shoots around your table. This will be the blessing for the man who fears the Lord." So he hits on 2 of the major things that 3 of the major ones we've already said. Yourself, your spouse, and your kids. But he's working his way out from God. If you fear and obey God, you will be blessed at your work, and then your spouse, your wife, and your kids. And they're using very culturally contextual metaphors. That this society was all about having a spouse and children and making the home big. And last week, Wayne talked about children being like arrows in a quiver, and that's the fiery zeal side of children, that they are an offensive weapon at times. But this one talks about the tenderness of kids. It says they're like olive shoots, like the youngest olive vines, weak and full of life. And he's saying the blessing is this, that you'll have fruitfulness in your home. It also is painting a picture of fun and festivity. Think about kids surrounding a table. It's a lot of energy and a lot of fun. But it's also talking about a future. That if you have kids, that means your name is going on. There's a future. And so it starts with fearing God, obeying God. It's going to be blessing your work and prosperity. And I know that word for many of you is like, is this a prosperity sermon? Maybe, because it's in the Bible. But then he talks about your spouse and kids, and I would say this is a very clear caveat. I know many of you are childless and you don't want to be. I know many of you are divorced or widowed or single, and you wouldn't have designed it that way. Jesus' words in Mark chapter 3 is something we have to look at this point. Jesus is being talked to by a lot of people, and everybody had questions. Turn to Mark chapter 3. It's important to see this, especially if that's you. If you hear this, that you're like, oh, a wife, that's great. Kids, that's great. That's not my story. It's never going to be my story. Mark chapter 3, verse 31. Maybe you know it, but you need to be reminded of it. Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, hey, your mom and brothers are outside looking for you. Jesus says, like within earshot of your mom? You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't do that. Who are my mother and my brothers, he asked. And look at this. What does he say? He looked around at those seated in a circle around him, and he says, here are my mom and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and my sister and my mother. Meaning Jesus is placing more priority in the closeness of his spiritual family than his biological family. And so, yes, this is a culturally conditioned metaphor that they were an ancient society that was really seen as if you had a spouse and children, you were well, God was blessing you. But as the church today, we would say, you have so many brothers and sisters in Christ. You have so many sons and daughters that are younger than you, further behind on the journey following Christ. You have so many mothers and fathers that are older than you and more experienced. And if you obey God and fear him, you'll be blessed and they'll be blessed. It's going to be fun. There's going to be fruitfulness. There's going to be a future. And whatever you think about this, know that blessing inherently produces life. Blessing in your relationship with anyone else around you. Maybe you don't have any siblings and you don't have any kids, so it's a best friend. Maybe you have kids, but you're single. And so you invest all of it wherever there is blessing, which comes from obeying God and fearing him. Life shows up like an olive shoot, like a vine around your table. He continues on because it doesn't just stop there. Verse 5. May the Lord bless you from Zion. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. May you live to see your children's children. Peace be on Israel. Fear the Lord, obey God, leads to blessing and prosperity in your life and work. It leads to blessing and prosperity in those nearest among you. And it leads to blessing and prosperity in your nation. And the timing of this is interesting because we're seeing a huge global conflict. And you might say, well, what part do we have to play in it? And I go, all I know is that the psalmist is singing about how good it is when you and I can obey and fear God, how it blesses us, and then it works its way out. This isn't the only place. If you want to look up Jeremiah 29:7, 29:11 is for many are the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, all that kind of stuff. 29:7, God is speaking to Jeremiah saying, I'm sending you out of or into captivity. Look at it. Turn. It's good for you. Turn to Jeremiah 27. I earmarked it so I wouldn't take forever. Jeremiah 29, verse 7. He's telling Jeremiah, seek the prosperity of the city to which I've carried you into exile. The place that you're in exile, I've sent you. Pray for it. We're not in exile in the United States. I don't think any of us here are in exile here. Maybe you are. But he says, pray for the place that you are, even if you're in exile. Verse 7, pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. So the beautiful picture that I love about all of this, and there's a lot of context going on. Know that the psalmist was writing this probably in captivity himself. But he's saying, instead of looking at all these spinning plates, that we have all of these different responsibilities, if you can see that all of your responsibilities, every person and every group and everything that you're going to be doing are all interconnected. And you can start by looking to God and fearing him and obeying him, it's going to work its way out. Instead of spinning plates, it's more like a pond. Picture a pond. Close your eyes and picture a smooth as glass pond. I don't know how big your pond is. We have a pond in our neighborhood. That's the one I always picture. Smooth as glass. Maybe you've been on the ocean when it's smooth as glass. That's amazing. It's an unbelievable sight. So this pond is your life. And now I have a rock in my hand, this rock. What would happen if I threw this rock into your smooth as glass pond? You'd be like, don't do that. What does it do? Makes ripples, doesn't it? And a pastor's told me this, and I've talked with some of you about this, is that the pond is your life, and the ripples are the relationships that you have, the responsibilities that you carry. And you throw this pebble in there, this rock, whatever it is, and it makes concentric circles working its way out. But you know, if you look at even this picture, the rings on the outside aren't any bigger than the ones on the inside, are they? And so we can start to look at the responsibilities. Whichever one you said was paramount, let's take the splash. It's like a perfect drop in your pond. That first ring is your first responsibility. Maybe if you're married, you go, it's my spouse. It always has to be. I even have kids, and we need to tell our kids that our first responsibility is to love each other. We're going to go on dates, even if they don't want us to. We're going to take time away, even if they don't want us to, because the best thing for them is for us to stay in love and to be together. And then the next ring, if you have kids, is probably your kids. They need a lot from you. And I've heard from some of you guys that have older kids is they actually don't need less, which I'm like, come on. It just gets way more complex. It's like not, I need a snack 14 times, but like, I need relationship advice. I'm like, no, you know? And then there's a next ring. I know for me, it would be work in the church. For me, it's my job. I'm full time. And then outside of that, maybe it's friends. And then, leisure outside of that. Maybe you have like 15 rings. But what if I throw this rock in your smooth as glass pond? It makes a ripple. But what if instead of that one, I throw this one? What happens to the ripples? They get bigger. The interesting thing, I was praying about this morning, and this came up, and I'm just going to go with it. The ripples don't make the rock bigger, do they? The rock is absolutely the driver for the size of the ripples. And this psalmist is inviting us to see all of those responsibilities that you have, the concentric circles around this rock. And you've guessed it. The rock is your relationship with Jesus, the Christ. The size of this rock affects the size of the ripples. And the ripples aren't going to make your rock bigger. You having a great relationship with your spouse isn't going to make this rock all of a sudden get bigger. What's going to happen is you investing in fearing the Lord and obeying Him and learning about who Jesus is and what He did for you is going to make that ring bigger. And the way it works too, and you know this, is that they're all so connected. The hard part about this rock saying, this is what I want to be a person who makes Jesus my biggest rock, I'm going to make everything else, is that we probably spend the least amount of time with Jesus. But that's just practical. You think about even you prioritize it. Maybe you said your spouse is most important, but then you have kids. Who do you spend more time with? Who do you spend more mental energy thinking about? Maybe you're a student and you also have a job. Well, I go to school 40 hours a week and I have a job for 20 hours, but I really like my job more than school. What do you spend more? It's not like whichever has more time is the most important. But the picture that the psalmist is saying is if, verse 1, you can worship. If you can fear God and obey Him, He's going to bless you. Whatever the work of your hands is, He's going to give it blessing. And He's going to bless those nearest to you. Spouse or a best friend, kids or siblings, co-workers or teammates. And then He's going to bless the wider area around you. Could you imagine? Could you picture? Maybe just picture your workplace. And every person in that workplace who calls themselves a Christian actually fearing and obeying God more and more. How amazing would that workplace become? A lot of you guys that are in school, you have Christian teachers and classmates. How amazing would the school become if everyone who is calling on the name of the Lord actually had a reverential awe and maybe a terror of God every once in a while and obeyed what He was telling them to do and who to be? How amazing would that school be? was thinking about this too. I want to be the person that makes this rock not stay this size. I want to be the person that when I think about the impact of Jesus on the people around me, is that it's way more like this than it is like this. Maybe there's days when it's either or. You go, yeah, I would love that too. That would be amazing. What does it look like to actually obey? That's where I want to think about. The first one is obey who? You're all obeying someone, aren't you? Maybe for a lot of you guys, you're obeying yourself. You're your own boss, king of your castle, whatever it might be. Maybe you're still a young adult and you're obeying your parents in some degree. Maybe you're an employer and you obey your boss. Whatever it might be, you're all obeying someone. The Oxford definition of obedience is going to be put up on the screen. We got that one. It says compliance with an order, request, or law, submission to another's authority. That we all are obeying, and all of these things have rules. My mom had rules in her house. Your job has rules. That's why they give you a job description. The school has rules. That's why they give you a syllabus. All of these things that we're obeying have rules and standards, and God does too. And what we can start to do is we go, well, I want to obey God, but there's a ton of rules. Have you read the 10 Commandments? I'll go, yeah. Have you read the 613 laws? I was talking to a friend who's reading Leviticus right now, and they're like, it's boring. Like, there's so many rules. And I'm like, yeah, there's like 600 plus. It's a ton. There's a lot of things about how to live. And you go, wait till you get to the New Testament and you read the Sermon on the Mount. That's not even rules. That's like guidelines that are way, way difficult to think about ever living. But when we think about who we're obeying someone, and could we obey God? But Tim Keller says it really, really beautifully. You put that quote up there for me? Tim Keller quotes, essence of Christianity and obedience is not do's and don'ts, but personal allegiance to Jesus. Then when we think about who we're obeying, we need to avoid thinking, I don't obey my mom because her list of do's and don'ts is better than the other mom. I obey her because she's my mom. Not anymore, I obey the laws of the land not because I like them, but because I know that there's certain consequences. I obey God because not His law is like the best law out there, though it is, but because I know who He is and I want to have a relationship with Him. So the first question is, who? The second one is that we have to see the order. We have to see the order of where we can obey. Maybe you're here and you're like, I'm really rebellious and I need to obey. I think you're starting in the wrong order. If you look throughout the story of Scripture, we could start in the story of the garden. There's a picture they're going to have of what they think the garden might look like. They didn't have any artists or photographers back then. Is that we have a picture of the garden where everything is amazing. Adam and Eve were given all that they needed to live. I think they could talk to animals. You can argue with me about that if you want. They had all the food that they needed, just stick around, and then they had one thing that they weren't supposed to do. And that's where we see the order right away from the get-go. There was grace. Here's something given to you that you don't deserve. Adam and Eve didn't merit the garden. And then He said, now obey. You've got a great thing. Don't eat the fruit. And then there'll be blessing. We know the story, like the third page of the Bible. Adam and Eve eat the fruit and they don't get blessing, they get curses. We see the story come up again. It's actually all throughout the Bible, but another one that I love is in the story of Exodus. Maybe you don't read the Bible that much. Do you know which came first? God leading the people of Israel out of Exodus, or out of Egyptian slavery, or giving them the 10 Commandments? He led them out first. They were rebellious, they complained, they grumbled. And after He led them through the sea, He then calls Moses to Mount Sinai and gives them the 10 Commandments. So there's grace first, and then how to obey. And what did He say? You read about the 10 Commandments. You read the language. Read between the lines. If you can obey, you're going to be blessed. You're going to have life and have it to the full. And they have varying levels of success in that. We see it really clearly, too, in Jesus. that he gives us a gift of going to the cross before we ever knew we needed it, before we asked him to do it, before we even wanted it. It says that we were enemies of God, and he still went to the cross on our behalf. And then after that, what does he say? Go into the world. Follow me. Do the stuff that I've been doing. Become like me. And he constantly draws you in. And if you do it, there's blessing. But we disorder these things. We say, well, I really need to obey first, and then I'll get blessing. And then maybe there'll be grace. That's not Christianity at all anywhere. Always through the story of Scripture is God saves first, and then he calls how to live, and then he invites you to experience the blessing of doing so. And we might even be like, well, I really want the blessing, and so I'm going to obey, but then you're putting the blessing first, and that is the disordered priority. If you want to be a person who is able to obey, you have to see the grace that you've been given first. 1,000 little graces even today. We talked about it at prayer, that there's a psalm that says, this is to the day that the Lord has made. And I'm like, it's wet and rainy. But it's another day. It's a grace. And I want to obey God because he's given me another day. But on top of that, and thousands of days I've lived, he went to the cross for me, which was a gift that I didn't deserve. And he didn't even show me and say, hey, I'm doing this right now. You better really pay up. He goes, this is a free gift. If you receive it, I'm going to then invite you in how to live. I think that's how we can obey. We have to see the order of obedience. A third one, though, this kind of gets to it, is why. Think of my first boss. I worked in an arcade at a video game place. And my boss had been there for years. And I obeyed him, both because I wanted to get raises and I could get fired, so you show up on time. But I also obeyed him, his name was Terry, because he was wise at the job. He wanted me to do well. And at the end, there were kind of consequences, right? You think about why. Maybe you've had a bad, I thought about this a lot. I don't know how to articulate it well. Maybe your parents haven't been great. Maybe they've been horrible. Think about the best father and mother, a picture of the best father and mother, why you would obey them. Because you can trust that they have your best interest, that they prove that they are wise and worthy of the decisions they're telling you to do, and because there are consequences. So when we ask, why should we obey God? All of those things are true times infinity plus one. I have little kids. That's how you win the argument. Infinity plus one. He is wise beyond measure. We can trust him because he's proven it time and time again. And yes, friends, there are consequences to living apart from obeying Jesus, but he actually paid for the consequences himself on the cross and invites you into it. I'm going to invite the worship team down. And one of the things we're going to do today is respond with communion too, which I think is fitting if you think about understanding the order that we get grace first. This is what I would say as we respond right now. Two thoughts came up. Well, first about communion. We're going to take communion. We have little cups that'll be around. You can peel up there's a little wafer in there with the juice. Just hold on to it. We want to take it together. If you have kids that have received Jesus and you want to go back and get them out, not today, maybe they've received Jesus today, that's amazing. If they're a Christian and you want to go out and check them in here so that they can take communion with you, we're going to talk for a little bit and wait for you to get back. Two things that come up when I think about obeying God and the fact that all of us, so I ask the question, like, what does the audience want? We would all love to see ourselves blessed and those near us blessed and our nation blessed, our workplaces, HOAs, neighborhoods, schools, all of it blessed. So what's getting in the way? The words I have is that it's either focus or fog. Maybe as I've been talking today and we've talked about obedience, it's been very clear. Like when you're trying to take a picture with a camera or on your phone and it comes into really clear focus. It's really clear what it is that God's been calling you to do, how He's been calling you to live, and you need courage, energy, conviction to be able to do that. It's crystal clear. You go, it's just hard. The other one is fog. You go, I don't really know. I don't know where God's calling me. I'm in the Bible, I'm doing all of these things. I don't really know, but I know that I want to, and I need the fog to be lifted. I need clarity on what it might be. Maybe that's true for you. Maybe there's something else. As we respond our time, we always want to make prayer available. We know you guys bring in stuff, whether it's connected to Psalm 128 or just in general. I know as we prayed this morning, a lot of people's hearts are heavy for what's going on in Eastern Europe. We go, man, we just want to intercede for that right now. You're welcome to come down and receive prayer. So what I'm going to invite you to do is I'm going to invite you to stand. And our prayer team is going to come down to this little middle aisle right now. There's going to be 2 of them on either side. And if you need prayer for anything, maybe you go, yeah, it is focused. It is really clear. I need prayer. I need courage for this thing. And I would tell you this, you can share it. This team is confidential, but you don't have to. I would say there's a lot of freedom that comes when you can be honest about the things that you're struggling with. Maybe you go, I don't really know, but I really want to be the type of person that's fearing God and obeying Him. I have this picture of what my neighborhood and what my home, what my wife or my husband, what my kids' lives would be like if I can just follow God with everything. I need to know the next step. I want to be that type of person. I want to be that person who unashamedly obeys God. I'd rather make mistakes obeying Him than make mistakes not obeying Him. As we worship, we're going to give people a couple minutes if you have kids to get to bring in for communion. I'm going to come back up and lead us in communion. Would you take this time just to process that with God? If you need prayer, come on down. Let's worship.